Everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice, big 12-game slate. Much like yesterday with high scoring, I expect the high scoring to be absolutely massive again today. With that said, though, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Also, drop a comment below with your home run calls, and if you get one right, I'll call you out in the next video. I will only be covering DraftKings today. My core plays for DraftKings is Matt McClain for Cincinnati and Jake Fraley for Cincinnati. And so with that said, let's get into our pitchers. We're going to start with Christian Javier for Houston against the Chicago Cubs. Now, this isn't the most ideal matchup against the Cubs, but I do think he's a good P2 option and a tournament option on the slate, as he's a little bit cheaper than some of the other studs on this particular slate. I do like some of the other guys better, and he is in a tough matchup, but he has a good upside, and he's definitely one of the better options on the slate overall. Clayton Kershaw is also in play for the Dodgers. He faces a really good matchup against Minnesota, which probably showcases why he's super expensive. He's also been the guy with some of the best fantasy point per game from the pitching perspective so far this season. He's had some really big games, even against tougher opponents, and this is an easier opponent for him. I like his upside here. He has really good strikeout potential as well, so that gives him even more bonus. Though his price is probably going to be the hard part. Verlander is in a really unhappy spot for me on this slate as he's facing Tampa Bay. Now, he's only had a couple games so far this season, and he faced those against relatively bad teams, and he definitely needs to have a ton of strikeouts in this game to pay off, because I expect him to give up some earned runs and stuff. Now, it is high risk, high reward. He's a very contrarian option. He's definitely reserved for for a GPP or tournament action, especially with a lot of people, to give you a contrarian option. But he's high risk, high reward as a result of the matchup. Zach Wheeler is in play for Philly. He's got a good matchup against San Francisco here, and his price has come down a little bit, making him a decent P2 option, which gives him some utility on the slate. He's got good metrics, and San Francisco doesn't jump off the page as a decent stack, so I really do think he has some utility in this particular slate. Kevin Gausman is in play for Toronto, though he does have a tough matchup against the Yankees. Now, he did face the Yankees a couple games ago in April, and he did pretty well, obviously with 11 strikeouts and no earned runs given up. But I don't know that this Yankees team is the same as it was when he faced them recently, as they had a lot of injuries, and some of those guys are back, and some of the guys are hitting the ball really well for them right now. He does feel really high risk, high reward, though he does have some of the best potential on the slate. He's also got a much riskier matchup than some of the other options. Then we'll move into Shane Bieber, who has been very inconsistent so far this season. But his price has come down, and that gives him some viability today. He's cheap enough and has a good matchup to draw a solid P2 option. He's also had quality starts in every game except for one, and he's been over 6 innings in all those games. His only concern here is the strikeout rate, which hasn't been great, but that limited him to 120 fantasy point game out of all, plus 20 fantasy point game out of the 8 games he's pitched in, which is a little concerning, but his price has come down a little bit to help with that. He definitely has the potential for a big game, but it's also, he's got to get those strikeouts up. He's had 4 strikeouts in a whole bunch of games, which is hard to score over 20 fantasy points when you only get 4 strikeouts. Then we'll look at Seth Lugo for San Diego. Now, he's got a good matchup here against Kansas City, and the matchup here is good. The potential is here. The K rate is up and down. He has some potential in a good matchup. He's also cheap and a decent contrarian option, and so he's viable on the slate. Alex Cobb is also available for San Francisco against Philly. Now, this matchup is nightmarish in that situation. He doesn't really have the upside as some of the other options, but he's a good contrarian option or a GPP play. With a decent K rate in some games, he can definitely get a good level. The matchup is just super annoying. Luis Castillo is super expensive. He's also got a tough matchup against Boston. He really just hasn't had the dominance that we would expect from him this season, and he's had 3 straight games with a home run given up. He still has a good enough K rate that he's definitely in consideration from a tournament perspective, but he's high risk, high reward, Hail Mary P1 option for tournaments. And then Lance Lynn is the last pitcher I'm going to mention here for Chicago White Sox against Cleveland. Now, he can do really good here, but his floor is very low. He's cheap enough to be considered as a P2 option in an extreme aspect, but He's high risk, high reward. As you can see, his games have been either over 20 fantasy points or under 10, with the exception of the first game. He has had a decently tough matchup situation so far this season, but oddly enough, he's done better against the better teams he's played and worse against the bad teams. So I'm not sure exactly how that works. But anyhow, he's somebody that's kind of in play, but very risky, but he's cheap, so that definitely helps. Moving to our catchers, we'll start with Cal Raleigh, who obviously hit a home run yesterday. He's got really good matchups, or he actually hit 2 home runs yesterday, I believe. He actually has really good metrics for this matchup again, and I like his upside. He's been hitting the ball decently well the last few games as well, and so he has a good potential here. His batting average is not ideal, but, we're looking for a guy that can hit a home run at catcher. Tyler Stevenson is also in play. Now, he's a little bit more expensive than Raleigh. He's a good alternative, though. He has good potential here. He had a decent game against Colorado yesterday, though he does need to hit a home run to pay off at this price. He is capable of doing that in this series simply because of where they're playing these games at. Jonah Heim is also in play for Texas. Now, he's hit the ball extremely well this season, and if he draws a start, he'll definitely be in play on the slate. His price is not ideal, but he's facing a very weak Atlanta pitcher who hasn't done anything good so far this season. Wilson Contreras is in play for St. Louis. Sorry. He has some really good matchup metrics for this one, though he has some inconsistencies lately, and depending on how his role changes throughout the rest of the season, it's going to be really interesting to see how he plays when he's not being the catcher. Then for a value play here, we'll look at Gabriel Mariano for Arizona. I really do like Arizona today as well, and they have some really good metrics for this game, and he's very cheap, and he helps you pay up for other options at other positions or even pitcher. Maybe in the first base, Paul Goldschmidt is obviously a top-tier option on the slate and a plus matchup with home run potential. He's also hitting the ball really well. Even without the home runs, he's scoring a lot of good fantasy points, and that's what we like to see as a good option on the slate. Freddie Freeman is also in play for the Dodgers. He's not been quite as good as Goldschmidt, but he definitely has the potential, and he has got just as much upside, and he's been hitting the ball extremely well, including with home runs the last 5 or 6 games. So I like the upside, I like his hitting potential, and he's got a really good matchup here as well. Some value plays here. Jose Abreu is in play for Houston. The metrics jump off the chart for him today, despite the fact that he hasn't hit a home run yet this season. He definitely sits in a position where I'm a little frustrated with how inconsistent he's been. The batting average is bad, and he hasn't hit a home run yet, but he definitely has the potential to do it in this particular matchup. Then we'll look at Brandon Belt, who has been absolutely fantastic lately for Toronto. He's got a decent matchup, not a great matchup against the Yankees today with Domingo German, but he's hitting the ball pretty well, and he's managed to score fantasy points in pretty good numbers as of late, and so that gives him some upside, especially when he's near minimum priced. I'm honestly surprised that he's so cheap still. And then for finally, Ty France for Seattle. If you go with a Seattle stack, he's definitely somebody that you want to get into that stack because of his price and his potential in this matchup. Moving into the second base, we'll look at Ketel Marte, who's hitting the ball extremely well, but inconsistently so far this season. He's been good lately, having a lot of hits, and despite having some slumps throughout the season, he's got good potential here. He hasn't been hitting the home runs like I kind of expected him to, but he's still hitting the ball well enough to score fantasy points a lot, and I think he's got good metrics for this particular game. Then we'll look at Valdez for Boston. Now, he is kind of in a weird spot because of his price coming up some. He is a good value play, though. When he does start, he manages to score some fantasy points, and he definitely has the potential to have a good amount. And especially at a position that's pretty hard to get home runs out of, he's definitely a viable option on the slate. Tommy Edman for St. Louis is also in play. He's hit the ball pretty solidly to start the season. He did hit a home run yesterday, but he's been somewhat inconsistent so far this year, as he feels like he's been going through, he'll have a couple good games and kind of go through a slump and a couple good games. Hopefully we can catch him today on a couple good games roll. He went 4 for 5 yesterday, so I like his upside and this potential. Then we'll look Jonathan India, who is obviously a great option on the slate for Cincinnati, and a very plus matchup in Colorado. He didn't hit a home run yesterday, but he definitely has the potential today against a rookie pitcher. Then we're going to look at Colton Wong as a Hail Mary option. Now, he has not hit the ball well at all this season, and he feels very risky here. But Seattle is a stackable team, and if you do use them, he's one good way to really help you pay up for other options, as he's super cheap. And if he draws a start, he'll definitely be in play. But he's very high risk, high reward, and I mean, he is the ultimate Hail Mary at this point. Josh Young is also in play for Texas. I really like his upside in this matchup. He's hit the ball decently well, though he hasn't been as good the last 10 or so games as he was earlier. And he's having several very boom games. So he's somewhat risky, but he definitely has the home run potential. He's somewhat due. Not only that, but he's got a great matchup today against a weak pitcher, which definitely gives him some advantage. For Rafael Devers, Boston, he has some good upside here. The batting average hasn't been ideal, but he's hitting the ball extremely well the last few games. He's had 2 hits in 2 straight games, and he should be able to continue that today. The question is if he'll hit a home run to help pay off for this price. Nolan Arenado, for whatever issue he was having early in the year, it feels like it's worn off, as he's had 4 straight games with home runs. And if he can continue that streak, then he'll be a nice play for this particular matchup as well. However, the matchup isn't quite as ideal as it was yesterday. But again, he's hitting the ball about as good as anybody the last 5 games, so I like his upside in this particular slate. Evan Longoria is a really good value play for Arizona. If you go with the Arizona stack, he's somebody I would really consider. But you do want to make sure he draws a start, because he's high risk, high reward otherwise. Then we'll look at Emmanuel Rivera, who doesn't really have the metrics to jump off the page, but he's a decent play if he draws a start. And you stack Arizona. I would avoid him otherwise. Moving into shortstop, we'll look at Duran for Texas, who's got a great matchup here against Atlanta. He's hit the ball pretty solidly to start the season, and he's also got some home runs, which is a nice added bonus. He's also scoring a decent chunk of fantasy points. Despite not doing anything yesterday, he's got a much better matchup today, and I like his upside in this matchup. Tommy Edman is also available at this position, so he's definitely in consideration. But the best option is Matt McLain for Cincinnati, who is facing the Colorado Rockies again, and he's got a really good situation here. He's going to have good potential. He started the season yesterday with 11 fantasy points, and I'll look for another considerable game like this. He has power and stolen base potential, and he hits the ball well, so I like his upside. And he pitches, and in AAA, he did extremely solid. I think he'll be another good option here in this particular matchup. Then we'll look at the outfielders, and we'll start with Acuna, who has absolutely massive upside. He is one of the best. He has been one of the best hitters for fantasy to start the season. His price is reflecting that, obviously, at $6,300. But he has great potential here. I love his upside, and I think he's definitely in play on this slate. Then we'll look at Juan Soto. For San Diego, who has a very good upside in this matchup. A little bit riskier, as he's been kind of boom or bust lately, but I do like his upside, and I like San Diego for a stackable team. Colorado is also in play today for Chris Bryant. I really like his upside in this matchup. He has great metrics for this one, especially facing Cincinnati's weaker pitcher, and I like his upside here. I think he's got home run or bust potential. He's also better at home, obviously, like most Colorado players. For value plays, I like McCormick for Houston. He's hit the ball, pretty average so far this season, but he draws really good metrics for this, and he's one of my favorite value plays on the slate due to the metrics in this matchup. I don't know that he's a must play, but he definitely has some interesting upside. Then we'll look at Michael Harris, who has not hit the ball particularly great so far this season, but he is back from injury and he's starting to score some fantasy points in every game. I don't expect his price will stay under $4,000 for very long once he gets going, because he definitely has the potential, and he did show that a couple games a couple weeks ago before he was hurt. So I like his upside here. He's got a great matchup as well. Lars Nootbaar for St. Louis is in play. He has some really good upside here. He's hit the ball extremely well lately, and I think he's got really good potential here. He's just hitting the ball great, and that's leading to a lot of fantasy points. He also has stolen base potential. Then we'll look at Jake Fraley, who is one of my core plays on the slate. He has really nice upside here. He has home run potential as well, and he normally is a pretty boomer bust play, and he's usually more viable when he's in Cincinnati. But ironically, this season he's not hit the ball well in Cincinnati, but he's hit the ball really good on the road, and he has home run potential here. I like his upside. He has that potential for that big 30 fantasy point game as well, and he's just cheap enough that you can pretty much roster him in any way. Randall Grichuk for Colorado was very close to being a core play, and the only thing wrong with him is he just doesn't play every game, so you do want to make sure he draws a start. But he has a good matchup here, and for Colorado, in Colorado especially, he's hit the ball extremely well so far this season, and he has nice metrics for this one, especially in a very anti-pitcher friendly game. Then we'll look at Lourdes Gurriel Jr. for Arizona, who has just hit the ball extremely solidly lately. I like his upside, home run potential, and elsewhere. He has some really nice metrics for this matchup, and he's just too cheap to ignore, especially if you run a Arizona stack. And then finally, last but not least, Brendan Doyle for Colorado. He is a Hail Mary play. Despite not playing a ton of games yet this season, he has 4 home runs already, and he hit 2 yesterday. Now, he's high risk, high reward, but he definitely has that potential at home, and I like his upside in this matchup. He's averaging 9.9 fantasy points a game in the 8 games he's played at home. So I do think he's high risk due to he's only a 250 hitter, but he definitely has the potential here. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.